Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I'm one of your hosts, Eden.
And I'm your other host, Peter.
Hey, Peter, how you been? What you been up to lately?
Working.
Fair.
Being a parent. And, listening to some music still. I don't remember what it was. Well, so, Meshuggah's album, Obzen, and this is going to make me feel really old, they released recently the 15th anniversary remastered version of that album. And last night, I think, I started listening to it.
Obzen's 15 years old?
I know. Did you just age a little bit hearing that? Did it make you feel a little crinky in your joints and kind of like you were going to turn to dust? Because when I saw that, I thought, no. Obzen's not. Obzen is a fairly recent album of theirs. It's 15 years old.
That's just what I was going to say. Obzen's a new one.
Yeah, no.
When I think of old Meshuggah albums, I think of Destroy, Erase, Improve. I don't think of Obzen. Obzen's old.
No, that is because Destroy, Erase, Improve is like 28 years old now. It came out in 1995.
Oh my God, I'm so old.
Anyway, now that I've made us both feel our age and perhaps beyond, I just want to say that Obzen is a fucking fantastic album. And I don't care how overplayed the song Bleed is. That song rules. It is incredible.
Oh, yeah. No, Obzen is an extremely good Meshuggah album. It's one of my favorites of theirs, I would say.
Oh, yeah. No, it was. So I've been listening to that. Still been listening to a little of the Neo Obliviscaris. A new album from the band Sermon dropped a couple weeks ago. And it is excellent. Very, very good. Again, I won't be surprised if it's in my top 10 at the end of the year, along with the Neo Obliviscaris album. And then I just want to report, I don't remember if I ever mentioned this on the pod, but in my little D&D group, one of the many tasks set before us was to deal with the ancient black dragon Villithrax, who for centuries had been enslaving and persecuting the dwarves of Kundrakar in this land in which our campaign is set. And one of our characters, one of the members of the group, was a dwarf from Kundrakar. And at his behest, we went to Kundrakar and we tracked down the ancient black dragon. Now, those of you who know about D&D will think this sounds insane, and those of you who don't will also think this sounds insane, because it kind of is. But hey, we're a group of level 8 characters fighting an ancient black dragon in its lair.
Level 8?
Yeah. Needless to say, we defeated that bitch. And only lost 2 of our party. So our cleric and our poor dwarf were taken under the water and then got a bite attack that involved the dragon rolling a natural 20. And our DM had already previously said, if the dragon rolls a natural 20 with its bite attack, you're dead. The dragon eats you. And so we went down after we defeated the dragon to hurry and revive our 2 friends and found only their legs. The rest of them were gone. But hey,
brutal.
We defeated an ancient black dragon.
And he was a slaver.
Oh, yeah.
So we're talking, this was the D&D Haitian Revolution here, because you were led by your Toussaint Louverture dwarf to go and kill this slaver, an amazing slave revolt.
Yep. And that is what
level
we did.
8.
At
Good
level
for
8.
You all.
You know,
good for
it was
you all.
Epic. It was actually giving me quite a bit of stress for the weeks leading up to the final confrontation with the dragon. And I was actually quite relieved when it was all over. That was where I knew that perhaps I needed to reevaluate some things in my life, where I was like physically feeling sick when I started thinking about the stress of going and playing Dungeons and Dragons and fighting this black dragon. And then it came to me that because I'd gotten sick and a number of other things, I'd kind of gotten lazy with working out. And so this week I've done much better at making sure I get up early and exercise every morning. And hey, guess what? Even after just 4 days of that, I feel a little less like I want to murder the hell out of everyone around me. So it's a good thing.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that for your son.
How have you been doing, Eden?
Also doing pretty good. Annoyed at the weather.
Yes.
For those of you who may not know, our father had his 70th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and my partner and I were going to fly out to be there on his birthday morning to surprise him at a big family brunch that Peter and I had put together. And then the nastiest tornadoes came and kept us from being able to leave because there was no way for us to get to the airport safely, and there's no world where that airplane was taken off on time. So then I was like, can I change the flights? And they're like, we could get you out Sunday. And I was like, that's 2 days later than I needed to be leaving, so that's not going to work. So we unfortunately did not get to come out and see you all. It's kind of a bummer. But
it was. We missed seeing you, but we were glad you were safe.
So hate tornadoes. We were safe. Our house was fine. Yet again, our neighborhood somehow, our city really this time, but often it's our neighborhood, unscathed. In the derecho back in 2020, nothing happened to our house, even though a bunch of other, huge trees in the neighborhood fell and did a lot of damage on people's houses. We lost a couple branches. We were fine. And with this last tornado, there was 3 tornadoes that touched down in our county. One right to the west of us in the city of Coralville, which destroyed about 60 houses. There was one right to the north of us in the city of Solon, which did a number on its downtown. And there was one right to the south of us in Hills. But we were fine. We were fine. We sat in our basement. The tornado sirens went for an hour straight, which that has never happened in all the years that I've lived here. It has never just gone straight for an hour.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
It was wild. The sky was like a sickly green, and you could just feel like the weather was wrong, and you could just feel it, and it was extremely strange. Very, very strange. We were glad that we had a basement. Our neighbors came over and just hung out in our basement with our barky dogs, let them sit in their laps while the dogs kind of were on edge because they don't like the sound of the tornado warnings any more than I do. But we all survived. We were great. It just meant that we weren't able to travel, which was a bummer.
Yeah. I say, it was sad not seeing you, but we're glad you're safe.
It is what it is. In terms of stuff I've been doing, I've mostly just been playing games I already play on the reg. I haven't really played anything new. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV. I've been playing Star Wars The Old Republic. I don't think I've ever even mentioned that I, on the reg, still dip into Star Wars The Old Republic. And the newest, galactic season started a couple of weeks ago. So, it's one of those games where I log in and play for 15, 20 minutes in the morning and get some conquest points and unlock some new companions and get some new gear. And then I don't think about it again until the next day. It's not like I'm invested really, but obviously I am still invested. I say I'm not invested in it like I don't play it nearly every morning still, but I still play Star Wars The Old Republic on the reg. Have you ever played that game?
I think I've started 2 characters, but it has probably been a minimum of 5 years since the last time I ever tried it.
That's fair. It has a very soft or a very special place in my heart. I have a very big soft spot for it, but it's not that great of a game. And the expansions especially have been extremely facile. They had their big last year, their big 10-year anniversary expansion came out. And I just recently replayed that with a newish character I made. It took me about 3 hours to play the entirety of the new expansion and all of the patch content that's come out since then.
That's not a lot.
It's not a lot. And this was their big, they got a new studio to do one of their, super fancy CG trailers and all that stuff. So we were like, people were like, oh, maybe they're actually going to go big with it, because like they haven't had like a really big expansion since Knights of the Fallen Empire, which was like 4 expansions ago, because people didn't really like Knights of the Fallen Empire or its follow-up Knights of the Eternal Throne. They really did not like that, so they like cut it short. It was supposed to be a trilogy. They cut the second one in half, and so they basically did 1.5 instead of 3 of their planned trilogy of expansions. And then everything that's come out since has just been like, hey, do you remember how we like blew up the spot about the fight between Republics and Imperials? Well, we're back to that. So welcome back to the status quo you love of the Republic versus the Empire. And it's just like, this is boring. This is a boring idea. And it's just kind of a shame, because like the vanilla game is maybe the strongest MMO story you'll ever play in terms of a first, like the base game of it. Like,
really,
the vanilla stories of Star Wars: The Old Republic are miles better than Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, which is the base game of Final Fantasy XIV. Miles better. Everything's voiced. There's 8 different stories you can play with your 8 different types of characters. You got 2 different Sith. You got 2 different Jedi. You got a smuggler. You got a Republic trooper. You got a bounty hunter. You've got an Imperial agent. So 8 different stories, fully voiced, male or female protagonists, love interests in the BioWare style, all this sort of stuff happening. But everything since has felt so much smaller and so much less consequential, and it makes it such a weaker overall MMO to recommend to someone. Like if someone were to come to me and say, I have 50 hours that I want to put into an MMO, I'd say play Star Wars: The Old Republic, pick one of the 4 sensitive characters. Do you want to be a swashbuckling Jedi Knight? Great. Do you want to be a diplomat? Play a Jedi Consular. Do you want to be swashbuckling Sith, except not like Jedi Knight, except bad guy? Play the Sith Warrior. Do you want to play a cool Force Ghost Eater? Play a Sith Inquisitor. Play it for 50 hours. Get in, get out, enjoy your time. But like if someone was like, I want to dig in to an MMO and like get to know raids and like play the whole story and try to build a community and all that kind of stuff, I would say play Final Fantasy XIV in an instant.
Okay.
Because as an overall experience, Final Fantasy XIV is miles ahead as a full experience. And as a totality of a story, it's way better. But again, if you were like, I got 50, 60 hours, I don't want to pay money, but I want to play a game, great, it's free to play. Play 1 or 2 of those Origins and have fun, and as soon as it says Rise of the Hutt Cartel, say nope, and then start a new character.
What do you pay for in that?
So there isn't a subscription. It is free to play. If you don't subscribe, you can play the entire base game, so all 8 Origin stories and the first 2 expansions are included free to play. Obviously, you don't get... They do things to try to make it annoying, basically, so you'll want to subscribe. Because basically with subscription, it's like $15 a month or something. I still subscribe when I'm actively playing the game, because the cooldown on fast travel is non-existent, as opposed to you have to wait 6 minutes before you can fast travel again if you are a free-to-play player. You get XP a lot faster, so you don't have to do as much side quests or things like that. If I want to stay on level, if you're subscribed, you basically just have to do the main story and you're usually good to go. Whereas if you're free to play, you'll probably have to go do some side missions or some heroics to try to get some XP from time to time. You can have more money. Like you can only have $1 million if you are a free to play player. But obviously if you're a subscriber, you can have up to $4 billion on your character.
Wow.
Which the inflation in that game is absurd at this point. Like the in-game like market board, the Galactic Trade Network, has a max of $1 billion for any transaction. So people don't even do transactions in anymore. They just do it in general chat on the fleet, and they're like, "Hey, I'm willing to sell this armor set for $2.6 billion." and that's what people. That's how people pay for. Like people pay that. I don't have that much, because when I used to have a lot of money in this game at one point, like 5 years ago, but then I stopped playing for 3 or 4 years, and now I got like $100 million between all of my characters. Whereas like a lot of these people will have like hundreds of billions in their like shared storage between all their characters, and it's just like, why do you because that's the way economies in video games and the world work. If you have an unregulated economy, inflation runs rampant.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's Star Wars: The Old Republic. I think it's fun most of the time. And if anyone ever wants to play,
one of these days.
If anyone's like, hey, I would like to play Star Wars: The Old Republic, let me know. Because I'll hop on a voice call with you and just like walk you through and have fun and like party up with you so that I can kill things much faster.
Cool.
It's a fun game. Last thing I'll shout out is I have been reading this novel, which you're going to hear this title and you're going to be like, that sounds like the most boring thing I've ever heard in my life. But it's a very cool book that at one point I was like, we should read this for the podcast. But then I was like, I think this is great, but I don't think Peter will like it. And it is a book. It is a novel entitled Everything for Everyone, an oral history of the New York Commune 2052 to 2072. And the premise of this book is that by the middle of the 21st century, America has basically fallen apart. And in the 2050s, insurrection has basically torn New York City apart. And this book is basically written like a postscript oral history of talking to the people who were involved in setting up the New York Commune during those 2 decades from 2052 to 2072, who basically create a like anti-fascist anarchist commune society in the ashes of the most hyper-capitalist country city on the planet. It's very cool. It's very, very cool. Again, I think it's just an incredible piece of fiction and in such an interesting way to present it, because every single chapter is an interview with a couple of these researchers. And it's just done like transcripts, like oral history style. So, this chapter will be called, chapter 5 is called Qin Liu on Making Refuge from Hangzhou to Flushing. And it is an interview between Iman Abelhadi, who's one of the researchers, who's one of the main characters basically of the book, talking to this person, Qin Liu, and asking them questions about what was your life like? How did you come to New York? How did you participate in what happened in the society that was built here in New York? And that is kind of the structure of the whole book, is this series of interviews, which, again, it sounds pretty dry. And to be fair, it is somewhat dry, but it's also so interesting in the way that it's presented as if it were this historical document, as if it were an actual historical artifact, and imagines such a radically different world than what I think it's hard for those of us who are, trapped by the capitalist society in which we live. It's hard for us to imagine the type of world that this book posits. And so I find it really affecting. And so, like I say, for a while, I was like, maybe we should read this for the podcast. I'm not going to make you read this for the podcast. I don't think you would enjoy it, but I think it's something really, really special. So if you are into imagined better futures, dear listener, pick it up. Everything for Everyone, an oral history of the New York Commune 2052 to 2072 by M.E. O'Brien and Iman Abelhadi, which are actually the people who are like the main interviewers. They act as if they are themselves, but 50 years in the future doing these interviews.
Cool.
It's very cool.
The only other one thing I did want to mention is, when Diablo 4 had its beta weekend, I went ahead and I jumped in with that, played a couple, I don't know, like 30 minutes or so, and went, yep, it's Diablo, and I like Diablo. And so then after that weekend was over, I got back into Diablo 3, have never leveled a monk up to level 70. I've done a barbarian, a crusader, multiple demon hunters, multiple sorcerers.
Well, that's because demon hunter's the most fun to play.
No, Necromancer's the best, man. Necromancer's
I like Demon Hunter. I just liked Demon Hunter's so easy. It's just like, yo, let me just turn on the like Gatling gun
the rapid fire
crossbows, and it's just like it melts. Everything melt.
Yep. I love the disintegrate ability on the sorcerer, which also kind of puts the sorcerer in that realm. But I finally decided I wanted to see what happened to a monk, so I created a seasonal monk, but the seasonal monk I created only after I had already created a seasonal demon hunter, who I got to level 70. Now, there's a thing going on in the current season where there is an altar at which you can sacrifice predominantly crafting resources, but it looks like things get more and more expensive the further you go. The second level of the altar, things you can unlock, one of the options was that no items have a level requirement. And since these are both seasonal heroes, they're sharing money, they're sharing crafting resources. And so I created a level 1 monk and then went and crafted at my level 12 blacksmith 2 unique, what normally would have been level 70 fist weapons. And then I put them on my level 1 monk.
And then you murdered everything, I would guess.
And then I one-punched everything until I got to about level 55. And then it would be 2 punches. And then I got to level 70 very, very quickly. And I bet, was so much fun. I was way of 100 fisting, just like punching everything as I went. And she just was annihilating everything. And it made me smile. So, Diablo 3, it still is it's one of those games that's so comfortable, so easy to go back to. I don't have to think about it. I am not one of those people who is going to waste time and mental energy trying to farm for a specific piece of gear or whatever. I'm just someone who likes to go in, make it just hard enough that I can kind of just have fun and kill stuff and get stuff and kill stuff and get more stuff and then move on to a new character and do it with. And it still scratches that itch. And so that was actually a lot of fun. I enjoyed the monk who literally punched her way to level 70 in about, probably 3 hours of playtime, maybe only 2.
That's pretty cool. I bet. That sounds fun.
It was fun.
Diablo 3 is one of those games that like I had a very hot and fast relationship with it, and I've not touched it since. I played it a hell of a lot, but
I go back to it about every year, 18 months, whatever, and just jump back in, and then I'll play it for a few weeks and then kind of get that out of my system and then move on to something else. But it's one that I keep installed all the time because I never know when I'm going to want to jump back in.
Fair. That's fair. One of my coworkers is a big Diablo fan. None of my coworkers listen to this podcast, so I can say it here. Earlier today, we had a staff meeting over Zoom, and both of us were in that staff meeting, but we're not actually in that staff meeting because we were joking about it over Teams to each other. Because what it was essentially, here's the Teams expert come to show us about the like basics of Teams, and like we use Microsoft Teams all day, every day, so like we know how Teams works. And then they split us into breakout rooms, and I had to like scramble and like turn over to my university laptop and like pretend like I had been paying attention the whole time because I was playing Star Wars: The Old Republic and he was playing Diablo 3 the whole time, because afterwards we were talking about it and we were like, well, that was boring. He was like, yeah, I was just playing Diablo 3 the whole time. And I was like, good for you. Because he's also extremely excited for Diablo 4 to come out. We were joking that it's like one of his 2 like I will pay full price for this game passes that he's giving himself this calendar year.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I will admit I have pre-ordered Diablo 4. I tend to not pre-order many games, but Diablo 4 is just one of those where, look, even with Diablo 3, they kind of goofed it up with the real money auction house at the beginning, but it didn't take very long for them to turn that thing around and really make Diablo 3, I think, a very good, very solid game. And I'm like, I don't know, whatever. Sure, Diablo 4, I'll enjoy playing it when it drops. So yeah, here you go.
Sure.
So, you know.
I'll probably pick it up when it's on sale at some point, because that is not one of my two that I'm giving myself a pass for to pay full price for this calendar year.
That is
my
fair.
two are, I think I'm probably going to buy Jedi Survivor as soon as I get paid at the start of May, because I really like Fallen Order, and Survivor looks really good. There's battle droids in it this time, baby.
Nice.
Anytime there's droids on screen, I get excited. They're my favorite. And then I will, of course, buy Final Fantasy 16 when it comes out, because I'm a sucker, and apparently I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan these days.
I think you are. I think you have demonstrated that to be true. So
16 will be getting purchased on day of. I'm not even... Jedi Survivor, I'm waiting until payday, because the university is stupid and they only pay us once a month, which is a pain in the butt. Pay your people more often than this. It's dumb.
Yeah, that is stupid.
I hate getting only paid once a month, but whatever. But what that means is, like, when Jedi Survivor comes out on April 28th, it's like, well, I could buy it, but then I'm going to have, like, $50 left in my checking account. So I should probably wait until I get paid on the 1st. But no, I'm playing Final Fantasy 16 on release day. Thank you very much.
Cool.
All right. Well, we have chatted for a while here. Should we move to the main event?
Let's do it. Let's talk about this.
Speaking of main events, let's talk about a big fight. So, astute listeners might notice that Peter and I swap off each episode who's hosting and who's basically introducing the idea. And I, hosted last episode where we talked about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then after watching it, I had this bug in my brain that I just really wanted to do a series of 3 episodes watching a trilogy of movies, and Peter was kind enough to acquiesce and let me kind of guide us through a trilogy of movies here. So this episode and the next 2 episodes are going to be about this trilogy of movies before we start talking about something else.
And I would like to say, for the record, that while you make it sound like I acquiesced, this, as far as I am concerned, was very much a favor that you were doing to me, where I am exhausted and am getting my ass completely handed to me by work and life in general. And Eden was very thoughtful to say, hey, if you want a break from coming up with ideas for the next 3 weeks, I got something for us. And I was incredibly grateful for them and for that offer. So that was the way I viewed it, lest anyone think that this was something that was pushed on me. No, this was a kind offer from you, which I very gladly said, yes, that would be wonderful.
You got to take the credit when I give it. Anyway.
No, not on this one. I got to give this one right back because you did me a huge favor. So,
well, this trilogy of films we're going to watch, anyone who knows me knows that I am a fan of large monsters in cinema. So this trilogy of films we are watching is the 1990s Gamera trilogy. Have you ever watched any of the Gamera movies, or were you familiar with Gamera as a Daikaiju character at all, Peter?
The word Gamera, which I would have said Gamera, so I'm glad to hear that it's Gamera. The word seemed to tickle some memory in my mind, but I have no knowledge of why it might have tickled a memory in my mind. I do not believe I have ever seen any of these movies, nor that I was familiar in anything other than, yes, had you asked me what Gamera was, I would have said, isn't that a big monster thing? But that
sounds like a monster.
Sounds like a kaiju.
That's fair. And he is. Gamera is very near and dear to my heart. I even have Gamera's name tattooed on my arm because I just love Gamera. He's one of my top 3 favorite monsters, alongside Godzilla and Mothra, the other 2 names that are tattooed on my forearm. I really like Gamera, and I think that what makes Gamera interesting is that it is kind of a parallel series to the Godzilla series. Obviously, Godzilla's been around a lot longer, has had a lot more films in the series, because we're between the Japanese and American releases, I think we're up to like 35 or 36 Godzilla movies at this point. Like,
holy cow.
There have been a lot of Godzilla movies. There have only ever been 12 Gamera movies. But basically the idea behind Gamera is Godzilla was really popular, and this company, Daiei, was like, we want to get in on this, and so they created their own monster. Unlike Godzilla, who's of course a large lizard, Gamera is a very big turtle man. He's a big turtle.
Yes, he is.
He's so cool. So there was a series of films. There were 8 films that came out in what is commonly called the Showa era. They map really loosely onto the same kind of era that the Godzilla movies came out, and also basically Japanese politics have been divided for hundreds and hundreds of years into what they're societally known as different eras, and eras that have different names. And the Showa era is basically post-war Japan to the 70s or 80s. So the original 15 Godzilla movies are all the Showa era Godzilla movies. So if you go, there's that big box set I think I've referenced on this podcast a time or two that is a Criterion Collection box set of the first 15 Godzilla movies in the Showa era collection. There were 8 films that were made, Gamera movies that were made in the Showa era. And then there is a second era called the Heishi era, which again maps onto that Japanese political era, where I want to say there's 7 or 8 Godzilla movies in the Heishi era. And there are these trilogy of movies from the Heishi era that came out from Gamera. And what I think is really interesting is that it kind of bridges the gap between the Heishi era Godzilla movies and the Millennium era Godzilla movies, because while this trilogy of movies were coming out, there were no Godzilla movies that came out. The last Godzilla movie of the Heishi era, Godzilla vs. Destroya, was 1995, which was the same year that the movie we're going to be talking about today, Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, came out. And then the end of this trilogy, Gamera, Revenge of Eros, comes out in 1999, the same year as Godzilla 2000. So I do think it's interesting that this just kind of slots in and fills kind of a gap in Daikaiju cinema that Godzilla was not currently using, because Toho had made a contract and they couldn't really make one while the Roland Emmerich American Godzilla movie was happening. So that's why there were no Japanese Godzilla movies during that time, because Roland Emmerich was busy making his bad but dear to my heart 1998 Godzilla film. But so Gamera is interesting in the ways that it kind of juxtaposes itself to what Godzilla does. Because maybe we should talk about, before we get into the big things, we should talk about this film. Before I give a summary, because I've been talking a lot. You'd never seen a Gamera movie. You weren't sure what Gamera was. What did you think about this Gamera movie I made you watch?
I don't know if I'll ever watch it again, but I freaking loved it.
Go on.
This movie is ridiculous to me as someone who does not watch many of these movies. Very little exposure to them for me. But this movie was silly. It was ridiculous, but it was funny. It was, they were trying to have there was trying to be some social commentary, and there was even some like at one point I was like, okay, now we're having our eco drama moment. And It was trying to do all these things, and it did some of them okay, and it did some of them terrible, but man, the people were all in, and the freaking practical effects. It is 1995 and we still got dudes in rubber suits just like falling against styrofoam and making it crash down. And this shit was just ridiculous and lovely. And it made me kind of go, there should be more movies like this that are just made because somebody goes, I want to make something that I love, and they freaking do it. And again, I don't know if I'll ever watch it again because I didn't really like it, but I loved every minute of watching this.
Well, do you know what the best part is? There's two more movies in this trilogy we're gonna watch, and this I think is the weakest.
Oh, I know. I'm psyched for it because they're the same director, right?
Yes, they are. They're the same director, the same writing staff, and the same a lot of the same characters. These are, in the Godzilla movies, there is not a whole lot of continuity between main characters, directors, ways that Godzilla is portrayed, but this trilogy is like tight. This is a story of these 3 movies, all of them written by the same people, all of them directed by Shusuke Kaneko, and all of the effects work done by Shinji Higuchi, who is like super famous as an effects guy. We'll talk about him in a little bit probably. I think this movie is such a good distillation of like, what can you do with a kaiju movie? Like, this is the like apex form for me of what a kaiju origin movie should be. We've got big monsters. We've got them fighting each other. We've got overwrought dialogue. We've got like, even to the point of having like the hint of like, maybe there'll be some romance, but we don't ever see it on screen because that's just not what you do in these daikaiju movies. Like, it's always just like subtext rather than text. And, you know,
I love the, what is it? It's the, he says something to, you know, the dude says to the I don't know the names, but whatever. And he's like,
you don't need to know their names.
Sometimes there's something like, sometime I'd like to take a walk and show you a Tokyo that's not, you know, being destroyed or something like that. I'm like, that's sweet. You guys are watching a turtle and a freaking pterodactyl just tear the shit out of everything. And you're having this moment. And I love you both.
When he like tries to go to her house, when she's got like when he's got like the little watermelon that he's like, she's not at her house.
Yes, he's got a watermelon. It's so cool. I love it.
And like, that's how he is characterized through the whole film. Like, when he goes to the scientist's house and introduces himself, what does he do? He buys dinner and makes them dinner. And like, he's just like gormless. He's just like the sweetest, most gormless guy.
He's like, dude, and like, I wrote down, dude's just going in and making dinner unannounced. I'm like, okay, I guess this is a thing.
At a guy's house he's never met.
With the dude's daughter there. It's just like some random dude showing up and he's like, I'm just going to make dinner for you. Here, you know, you're not here. It's just me and your daughter and I'm making dinner, but I am without guile and I'm here because I want you to let me take an unpaid job because I'm so guilty about the fact that this plutonium-filled ship ran aground on this atoll that I'm like one of the first notes I made, and we'll get into all the particulars and you can do your summary, but one of the things that fascinates me about this movie, and I expect many of these movies in particular, but it's really cool to watch. Now, okay, I'm going to clarify this, and this is me coming from a place of absolute ignorance. So if I am wrong, if I am saying something stupid, please call me on it. But I look at some of the things and a lot of the things that happened in this movie and I go, you would never do that in an American-made movie because from a societal standpoint, that's not the way our society thinks and works. And in some cases for the worse, because the second note I took, and again, I'll let you get into the plot summary, but very early on in the movie, we've got these ships, there's a convoy, they're transporting plutonium, and the boat with the plutonium potentially runs aground. And they don't know why. It shouldn't be. There should be, super deep here. What's going on? Oh, it's this atoll, this floating random atoll. And he's so worried and so guilty and feels so much responsibility at the fact that he could have released this radioactive plutonium. He did not, but he could have. He feels so much responsibility about this that he's like, I want to come join the insurance company that's going to go and figure out what happened and make sure that we know what's going on because I did not, but I could have caused major damage. And that was an example where I thought to myself, no one in an American movie would watch that and go, yeah, that makes sense that somebody would feel that much responsibility because I don't think we do as a culture to any degree.
I agree with you.
That I get the impression that, again, not everybody, and I realize I'm making generalizations, but I think that from a cultural standpoint, things like personal responsibility and everything, in the very little bits I've seen, seem to be a much more significant part of Japanese culture in a way that sadly it is not in ours, that we are so much more of a me society. And this is a perfect example of someone going, I owe something to society. It doesn't matter that it could be at my expense. This is what I need to do because that is what is good for the group, for the society, for the people, for the country, not so much what is good for me. And that, I thought, was really cool. And in a lot of ways, you see that coming up in this movie, but never in a way that's like beating you over the head saying, oh, other people should be like this. No, it's just, this is the way. This is just it, This is just how you act. From The Mandalorian, this is the way. That's just how you are. And it seems weird and foreign to us because we are such an egocentric society in America, to our detriment in so many different ways. But that was actually that was the first thing in this movie that jumped out at me that I thought, this is cool because this is just somebody not even probably thinking about the fact that this would be weird to many of us who might be watching this movie, but that's what you do. And I loved that.
Yeah.
That was a rant. Sorry about that. I was excited.
No. Don't feel bad about that at all. I love it. Yeah, I really like this movie because it just is. I'll do the summary because I keep putting it off.
Okay, so, let's do it.
They are, as Peter said, taking a huge thing of plutonium across the Pacific Ocean. They even mention if this gets out, we're going to kill the entire Pacific Ocean. What are we, is this really what are we doing? This will be, they even mentioned this will be like the strength of 100 Nagasaki's or something like that.
Yep. That's what it says.
And so they get stuck on this atoll and they're like, this is supposed to be 3,000 feet deep. Why are we stuck on an atoll? And then the atoll moves. And so again, Yoshinari, who is this guy who is one of the Marine officers, freaks out about it and is like, I need to join this team of insurance adjusters. Meanwhile, Mayumi Nagamine, who is an ornithologist, is taken to this island where her mentor has disappeared. And she gets taken by this, goofy police officer to the island, and everyone on the island is dead. And they find this enormous, it was very reminiscent of Jurassic Park, this enormous shit. And within that shit was...
But they don't ever say that's what it is. But I was like,
but we all
when
know.
That scene happened, I'm looking at it and all I could hear is, isn't it Jeff Goldblum who says something about how that's a huge pile of shit?
That's exactly, he says, that's a lot of shit. And that's exactly what's happening here. And within, they find, the professor's, pen that he always takes with him. So obviously, Nagamine can tell, oh no, the professor's dead. Long story short, there are these three bird-like creatures. They keep calling them birds. They're not birds. They're pterodactyls. They're gyaos. They're weird pterodactyls with triangle faces. But they take off and are clearly going to another village to try to attack and eat. They're able to, prevent that. They try to get the government involved. The government's like, okay, we're going to capture these. We're not going to kill them. We're going to capture them. So they plan to lure them to a baseball stadium where they will, use helicopters to guide them into the baseball stadium, present them with a ton of, beef, and then shoot them with tranquilizers and put them down. Two of the three are and close the ceiling because, of course, why wouldn't you close the ceiling?
Well, the reason I'm laughing is because this is just me being in there. They say they're going to shoot him with a tranquilizer, but then they say they're using succinylcholine. That's not a tranquilizer. That's a paralytic agent. It doesn't knock them out. It paralyzes them. Which I'm like, what are you doing?
6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They just want them to stop moving.
Yeah, but they're going to stop breathing if you shoot them with succinylcholine.
That's fair. Here's the question.
Sorry.
Here's the question. Did they really say that precise thing in the original script? Or is that
who knows? Or if that's in the sub.
Yeah, some subs license taken. Heaven only knows. There's no way to find out. This was pretty poorly subbed in my case. I don't know how yours was. None of the on-screen text was translated at all.
Oh, where did you watch it?
I have the DVD, or I have the Blu-rays that came out from Mill Creek a few years ago.
So it was, at least the first film, it was free on Amazon Prime.
Oh,
and
well,
all of the
I busted out my DVD or my Blu-rays.
All of the on-screen stuff was translated. It was sometimes hard to read because they would have the sub on top of the Japanese characters, and you kind of like look at it, and then if the Japanese characters went away fast or before the sub went away, then you could catch it before it went away. But it did at least try.
Yeah, no, the Mill Creek Blu-rays simply don't translate any of that. So, like, when it shows you, like, the newspapers that you're clearly supposed to be able to read the, like, the headlines of, like, you know, you do in movies all the time. Uh-huh. I got nothing. I have no idea what any of those said. I just saw a whole lot of Japanese, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, it translated all of those. Those were all subbed on the,
that's good to know.
The one on Amazon Prime.
That's good to know. Anyway, they capture 2 of the 3 giant flying creatures. But then one of them escapes, and lo and behold... Oh, first off, the insurance adjuster dudes find the atoll. They climb on top of the atoll. There is this wild stone slab that's covered in ruins. And when Yonemori touches it, he's like, it feels warm. It feels like body temperature. And then it shatters. All of the, rocks and stuff starts falling off of the atoll because it's really a turtle under there, babies. And
also, I just have to point out, so that we make sure we have said this, turtles are not endothermic.
They're cold-blooded. They're cold-blooded.
So really, that part
However...
But this turtle breathes fire and has rocket feet and arms.
I was going to say, most turtles can't turn into jets that fly into space.
It's true.
So he's probably hot-blooded. We'll get there. He comes out from the ocean, starts busting stuff up. One of the Gauss flies at him, and he just like one-shots it. I love that first scene when Gamera stands up. One of the Gauss flies up to him, and he just goes, smack, and it's done. It's game over for that guy.
He just punches it out of the air, and it's just like, thwack. Because at this point, the Gauss are only like, what do they say, 15 meters
across,
and Gamera is like 65, I think was the number that at least that it threw out. So he's quite a bit bigger than they are currently.
At this point, yes. He goes to the stadium to kill the other 2 because clearly he is hunting these things. He's not able to stop them. They use their amazing, like, I don't even know what you would call that type of power. Beam laser that they have in their mouths.
Yeah, kind of where they can like shoot laser breath stuff.
Yeah, they have laser breath, but it's like a beam weapon that can like clean cut through everything. So they use that to get out of their cages. They fly away. There's some fighting. They disappear. I think he kills at least one of the other ones. But then he also goes back to the ocean. In the meantime, our gormless hero, Yonemori, goes back to the home of the insurance adjuster dude and gives his daughter Asagi a Magatama, which there were Magatamas all over the body of Gamera when he was floating in the ocean. It's this amulet that's kind of shaped like a kama. It's traditional Japanese, and they're all over Asia, but the Magatama is specifically its name in Japan. And so he gives her this Magatama, and then it starts glowing, and she starts psychically connecting to Gamera.
Heck
and
yeah.
So, yeah, man, she forms this psychic spiritual bond with him. And so, the ornithologist and Yonemori start working together, and they're trying to figure all this stuff out. They're nearly killed trying to rescue this kid in this other place where the Gauss are attacking. But this is where Gamera kills Gauss number 2. They've gotten a bit bigger, but they're able to save him, or he's able to save them, but he blocks with his hand their the Gyaos's laser breath, and suddenly Asagi starts bleeding from that hand. So something's going on there. They get in another fight. So she is somehow suffering the same wounds and the fatigue that Gamera is feeling because of their spiritual bond. So she starts trying to get to Gamera. He's shot down over Mount Fuji. Because why wouldn't you put him at the base of Mount Fuji? It makes it so picturesque. But he's shot down at the base of Mount Fuji. Here's another one of my favorite things that is such a cultural difference between American culture and Japanese culture. I loved the part where they were like, oh, well, we can't shoot him until the House of Representatives gives permission for us to shoot him. Because we've never engaged, the Japanese Self-Defense Force has never engaged in military action on Japanese soil. We can't do it now unless the government gives us permission. So just that insistence on that, following that bureaucracy, whereas again, in an American version of this movie, they just start shooting. The military just starts shooting the heck out of Godzilla. We've seen it happen many times in the Godzilla movies. But I do think it's very funny that this kind of emphasizes the bureaucracy and almost to a certain point the inefficiency of the bureaucracy, which is a very interesting thing that comes up later in Shinji Higuchi's work, who is a guy who worked on this movie, which we'll talk about later. But I have to finish my summary. It's taking forever. The last Gyaos escapes. It keeps eating. It keeps growing. It is now bigger than Gamera. And they're able to collect some biological data. They find out that the Gyaos only have one chromosome. And it is a perfect chromosome. There is no wasted data because these are clearly synthetic beings. These are not natural organic beings. These were created by someone. They're genetically engineered. They reproduce asexually. And so they start trying to speculate on where could these creatures have come from. And ultimately, I think that they land on it being some sort of ancient civilization, like an Atlantis type thing. Which, Atlantis is not the only one of those, hyper advanced ancient civilizations in different cultures across history, but it's the one that, as, Americans were the most familiar with, but something sort of like that. And so they're clearly they created Gyaos, and then Gyaos was killing everyone, and then they must have created Gamera, and he didn't save them, but he's around to save us now. Which, okay, sure. So
the logic follows.
Yeah. At this point, Gamera is really hurt. He's hibernating at the bottom of the ocean. Asagi is also basically fallen asleep. She's injured. She's laying in bed. She can't seem to recover. Finally, she wakes up after Gyaos has grown. It's become a super Gyaos. It attacks Tokyo. It destroys Tokyo Tower and builds a nest in its ruins, which is I was watching this with my wife last night, and she was like, yo, that's a really cool shot when the sun is setting over the Gyaos sitting in the ruins of Tokyo Tower. Asagi finally wakes up and says, Gamera's on his way, babies. Let's go. So they go to where the government has been trying to attack Gyaos and failing. Gamera, through the sewers, ? Through the subway tunnels, ? Who knows? Comes up from underground and is like, fuck you, and destroys the nest and all of the eggs. They start flying. Oh, and again, Gamera can fly. He can retract his limbs and then just shoot jets out of them. Sometimes that means that he spins like a top, which is what he does the first time we see him fly in this film.
Well, it's because he retracts all of the limbs. Yeah, you get the front and the back, so then he's going to spin. But if he just pulls his legs in, then you got no legs, but his arms out and his head's out, so he can still fly and bust stuff, but he's just got rocket legs.
It's very cool. Needless to say, a massive battle ensues between Gamera and the Super Gyaos. Again, they fly into space. They leave the atmosphere, which causes them to both crater back down to Earth. Eventually, Gyaos overpowers Gamera, but Asagi uses their spiritual bond to revive him. He bites off its leg.
Not just the spiritual bond. Like at some point, she's like holding her dad's hand, and it's like he's now helping her help Gamera.
Yeah. And so they've crashed into a power station, because why wouldn't you crash into a power station? Makes for some of the best tokusatsu sets.
So many explosions. But
Gamera absorbs all of the explosions into himself, and right as the Gyaos is getting ready to shoot its laser beam, he shoots the biggest fireball he's ever shot right into its face, and it explodes everywhere.
Yes, it does.
Gamera looks over towards the people, nods. Asagi says, "I can't hear him anymore. I can't feel him anymore." And Gamera disappears into the sea. And that is how the movie ends. And they're like, well, I sure hope there's no other threats like Gyaos that come up. And Asagi's like, oh, he'll be back. He'll be back. And that is where the movie ends.
It is.
It's a cool movie. I really like this movie a lot. And we've talked a lot about why it's an interesting movie. Again, this is the most prototypical version of a good kaiju movie to me. We've got big action. The suits look great. The fights between the suits are fun. The sets that they destroy are incredible. They're they don't have the cheap feel that older stuff or less expensive stuff. Power Rangers always looks pretty bad because they don't have the budget that this had, So the suits just look really good. The design is really, energetic and fun, and the fights feel really kinetic. And there's just something to be said. I've said it many times on this podcast for practical effects. When you can tell that these are two physical things in space running into each other, and you can feel that in the way that it's captured on film. It just has a different feel to it than a lot of the newer stuff where it's all CG. The new Godzilla movies, there is no suit in the new legendary Godzilla movies, which he looks great. I love the design of the new Godzilla, but it's not a dude in a suit. And it would be more fun if it was a guy in a suit. So what are some other thoughts that you have about this movie? Other things you liked, or other things you wanted to mention?
Oh, man, there's just so many things. It was a little difficult to take notes on because I didn't want to look down too much while I was writing, because I got to be looking at the subs so I know what the hell's going on. There were some fun translations, and I'm going to throw this one out there because you'll appreciate this since you didn't get this. One of the newspapers flashes across, and the translation, the subtitle says, "Numerous casualties dead." I love it. I had to write it down. I'm like, that's so good. That's amazing.
Numerous casualties
dead.
That is what that normally means, folks.
I mean, there's things I wrote down. I did. Early on, I wrote, I love the practical effects. It looked, the eyes for the monsters, especially Gyaos, but even Gamera, the eyes are goofy as all crap. I mean, they look so fun. But I don't care because somebody made that. And I don't know why that makes me like it more than someone who digitally made something, but it kind of does. And I'm like, they look goofy and they don't ever really look threatening. And the way they fly is there's a lot of gliding. And then when they do flap, you go, no, that's not. But then there's these other times where when Gyaos is dive bombing and he's wings are tucked in and he's just and he and Gamera are cruising above the town and really just hauling ass flying over. Oh man, dude, it looked kind of stupid, but it looked still. I was like, I am totally on board for this.
Yeah.
What else? I mean, again, I loved the idea that all of a sudden I wrote down, now it's an eco drama ! Because at one point when they're talking, the main, again, I can't remember the names, but the two main characters, the bird scientist lady and then the military dude who's helping out the insurance folks, they're talking and basically it's like, ooh, well, maybe we, because they're trying to figure out where did these birds come from, because they find all of these eggs with dead with dead grouse that looked like they hatched and then like killed each other because there was no food. They were eating each other. And so they're like, ooh, well, what happened? Why did this happen? Where did they come? Why are they here in Japan? The guys ask, well, why here in Japan? And she's like, oh, the plutonium. We created this monster because we're basically this idea that we're messing with things that could mess up the whole world. And now it's going to bite us in the ass. And like just all these things that are happening that I'm like, this is delightful that you're including all of this. And to me, as someone who doesn't watch these kind of movies, I'm like, this is wacky and goofy as heck in so many different places, but done with like a sincerity and with a love for sort of the whole genre of films that these are in, that I don't care that it was kind of goofy, because I'm like, these people, everybody here, they're giving it their all because they're like, yeah, this is the story we want to tell, and this is the movie we want to make, and I love them for doing it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so interesting about this movie is the way that I see in this movie and in this trilogy of movies echoes of things that would come in kaiju cinema that the people who made this movie would go on to make, that are some of the best versions of it. Even if and granted, I think this trilogy is one of the best versions of it. I think this is one of... If someone were to say to me, I want to watch a big monster movie and I've never watched one, the movie we watched, Gamera Guardian of the Universe, is one of the three I would give them. Like, I would either give them the 54 Godzilla if they wanted an old-fashioned one, or I'd give them Gamera Guardian of the Universe if they wanted the perfect distillation of the genre. And then if they were like, I want something a little more modern, maybe a little less what you would expect, then I'd give them Shin Godzilla from 2016. And sure enough, Shin Godzilla was directed by Shinji Higuchi, who was the character designer for these movies, for this trilogy of Gamera movies. So this is where he kind of cut his teeth on live action, because he had been in animation before. Shinji Higuchi is a very important person in Japanese media because he's very good friends with Hideaki Anno. Do you know who Hideaki Anno is? The guy who made Neon Genesis Evangelion?
I do not.
Extremely important, creator in Japanese, culture. Created, again, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is one of the, most popular and well-known anime series that has ever existed yet. He created that, and it was his studio that made that. And Shinji Higuchi was one of the storyboard artists and screenwriters on Neon Genesis Evangelion. He and Hideaki Anno have been friends for years. And then he left animation to make the Gamera movies. And then later on, they would work together to make Shin Godzilla, because Shin Godzilla is basically a thing that, Shinji Higuchi is the director of, as well as the FX director, and it's produced and written by Hideaki Anno. So these two guys who are the creators of one of the most important anime, and then Shinji Higuchi, who would make some of the best effects work, would then go on to make arguably the second best, maybe the best Godzilla movie ever, with Shin Godzilla, which is incredible. It's so good and builds on a lot of the things that you see here about bureaucracy and the ways that government tries to or is unable to step up in a time of need because of the way that governments are structured, which is one of the main reasons or main driving plots behind Shin Godzilla. And then Shusuke Kaneko, the guy who directed this series of Gamera movies, also would go on to direct Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, which is a mouthful of a title. That is a long movie title, but is one of the most thoughtful Godzilla movies that you'll ever see, even with a ridiculous name like that, because it is explicitly dealing with the idea of loss and the idea of how does Japan recover from World War II, because in that one, most of the time Godzilla's the good guy who fights the bad monsters, just like Gamera did here, right?
Sure.
Not always. Usually, especially if they're ever introducing a Godzilla, he's usually the bad guy in the first movie. He's not fighting monsters in Godzilla 1954. Like, he is the bad guy and they're trying to stop him. It's not until the next movie when Anguirus shows up that they're like, oh no, he's saving us from the other monster. And then that is kind of what happens in each successive era of Godzilla movies. But what makes Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack interesting is that it is once again a time where Godzilla is the bad guy, because he is the reincarnation of the spirits of the Japanese who are mad at the way that things have gone since World War II. And so then the other monsters have to fight against him, and it is the only movie where King Ghidorah is a good guy and Godzilla is a bad guy, because King Ghidorah is like the most prototypical bad guy, like bad monster in the Godzilla movies. But in this, he's one of the protector guardian monsters that try to protect Japan from Godzilla, who is this force of nature imbued with the spirit of the destruction of the souls of those who were killed in the Pacific War, and is mad about Japan's denial of its past crimes. So, like, again, this movie doesn't deal with any of that kind of stuff. This is a much more lighter movie. It's a much more, goofy movie. But I think you see the nucleus of some of these things here that will be developed in films 2 and 3, which do get a little more serious and a little darker than this first movie did. And then again, we'll go on with this director to go on and make, one of my favorite Godzilla movies in 2001. And then the other guy, Shinji Higuchi, to make also one of my other favorites with Shin Godzilla. So I think it's really interesting to see that here, working on this, has a second run, has been less interesting character, because Gamera has never had the cultural, staying power that Godzilla does. But they were able to take it and really build a very fun and interesting story, and will continue to do so over the course of the next 2 films.
Yeah, no, like I say, it's not something that I see myself going back to without some particular reason. But sure. I did. I enjoyed it completely. It was a blast to watch.
Well, I am glad to hear that, and I'm very excited for next episode, where we will be watching Gamera 2, Attack of Legion, which is the second in this trilogy, which came out in 1996. You will see some, like I said, some recurring characters who were in that first movie you'll be seeing again. And it really ties into where things were left off at the start or at the end of this one. One thing that I think is really interesting about 2 and 3 in this trilogy, the opponent suits get much more interesting. Because the Gyaos looks kind of cool, but like, Gyaos is Gamera's most famous enemy from the old Showa era films. So he just kind of looks goofy. Like, Gyaos is a goofy looking bad guy. And like, they do what they can to modernize the look, but he still just looks like he has an anvil for a head. Yeah. And like, he just kind of looks goofy. But like, I'm very curious to see how you feel about Legion, who is the main opponent monster, the Mother Legion from the next film, because the suit work really off the charts. The design just goes really wild.
Well, I look forward to watching them.
Well, thank you all for listening. If you haven't seen these movies, apparently they're on Amazon Prime, so go watch them. I think
fun. All 3 of this trilogy is. I was looking on Just Watch, but I know again for sure the first one was, and so yeah, it was. It's out there. It's easy to watch, and it's just fun. Like,
it goes down smooth.
And you should know kind of what you're getting into. And as long as I think you know sort of what to expect when you start this, I think anyone who watches it is just gonna have a good time, and you're gonna laugh at some points, and you're gonna roll your eyes at others, and you're gonna like go, wow, that was sweet at some other parts. And when it's all said and done, there are so many worse ways you could spend 90 minutes of your time. And also, it was a pretty tight 90 minutes.
Yeah, man. There's something to be said for a short movie, and all of these are pretty short. They're all less than 100 minutes, I think.
Yeah, no, it was fun. And I appreciate you, first of all, again, helping me out and giving us an idea for a few sessions here. But most of all, it was fun because these are the kind of things, like, I remember absolutely loving the old Godzilla movies when I was very, very young.
Mm-hmm.
But I very much, for whatever reason, kind of moved away from that and have not watched anything. And so this was a fun way to kind of get me back into that and go, all right, yeah, there are reasons these movies persist. You know, there are lots of reasons that these types of movies continue to be made and continue to find an audience.
And like, obviously I really like them. I was talking at the beginning of the podcast about how I literally have Gamera's name emblazoned across the flesh of my arm. So like, obviously I think that these movies are pretty fun. It's actually, it's funny. I know exactly which posters each of the like the typography of the different names that I have. And so the typography for Gamera is actually from the poster for Gamera 3, which we'll be watching in a couple of episodes. So I really think that these are really great movies and I really enjoy them. And like, I'm not under any illusions that, like, obviously I don't think that kaiju cinema is, great cinema. It's not like, the sort of stuff that, but that doesn't mean that there's not something worth talking about. And that is, I think, what I think is most interesting about kaiju films. Like, I have often joked with my partner that sometimes I want to go back and get a second PhD. I would never do this. This is hell. This is hell.
I'm glad.
But I sometimes joke that if I were to go back and get a second PhD, I would want to get it in cinema studies, and I would want to write my dissertation on affect theory in Daikaiju cinema. So using affect theory explicitly to look at these films. And this would be one of those movies that I would probably have a whole chapter about this trilogy of movies and the way that affect theory helps us understand what's going on here and like why things work out the way that they do and why characters do the things that they do. And so again, this is not the Before trilogy, which is one of the greatest movie trilogies ever made, but there's something to be said for being able to sit back and enjoy it, but also be thinking about stuff afterwards and be like, that was really dumb and really silly, but it sure was cool how, like, he built a psychic connection with that girl and then they saved the planet.
It was cool. It was great.
It was very cool. Anyway, thank you all for listening. And we'll be back in 2 weeks talking about Gamera 2 Attack of Legion, which is a very cool movie. I'm very excited to talk about it. If you have any questions for us, you can reach out to us at feedback@themiddleofculture.com. And always, you can leave us a review or please go leave 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice. And with that, I will wrap up for this week. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, everyone.